Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls around the world. It's once again time for 10 to 1, the internet's favorite movie centric list making podcast. I am one of your hosts, Josh, joined as always by the Queen of Water Filters, Jen.
Yeah, people do call me from near and far to discuss the proper way to, not just get clean drinking water, but get the best drinking water for a good price.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a thing. I mean, we all have our own special gifts. Hey, some of us, just speaking generally,
Mhm.
are really good at seeing the art in a movie, the dialogue in a movie. Some of us, you might say, are critics. Some of us get paid for that job. Some of us maybe shouldn't get paid for that job because I don't know what they're thinking. And that basically is our list for tonight. There are plenty of movies out there that audiences love, that we personally love, Josh and I,
Mhm.
that critics did not like at all. Now, why didn't they like it? Well, I mean, there's always a list of reasons. Some people say thin story, some people say bad special effects, some people say they didn't like the actor. Some people think that they just know more than everybody else. But yeah, everybody's got their own opinion. It's just that when those opinions start to stack up and they kind of all don't like a movie, that's when you get a horrible critic consensus. However, there's a number of movies on, especially my list tonight, that I think are worth a second look. And I'll try to explain why. Not so much about what the movie is about, but just why I think the critics were wrong about the movie, why they think it was bad, and why I think it was actually pretty good. So that's how I took the homework. How did you take the homework, Josh?
Well, naturally, I took it as an opportunity to push my interesting, no, that's a word, my interesting agenda on my personalized flavor of comedy.
Oh my god,
And
are all of your movies like liberal? I mean, because if they are, first of all, I'm going to really enjoy it. But
I mean,
just
isn't that just all movies?
aren't they all made by libs in Hollywood? Let's own the libs tonight. Oh, good lord. Do you know how much I actually really hate that? Anyway, I digress. Please continue.
So I'm going to continue. Maybe agenda is not the right word, but I'm going to push my brand of taste down everybody's throat rather viciously and
Hmm.
maliciously. And you will see either A, you know what? Josh has made a couple of interesting points about these terrible movies, or Josh is right. Maybe it wasn't so bad. You see how either scenario I end up being right?
I mean, that kind of works. So I'm excited.
Well,
This
these
this
are
could
movies that I'm going to go to the floor for.
these could be good. I don't know. We'll have to see though.
No, they
I
won't.
I
But
I feel like there could be some interesting. I feel like there could be some interesting ideas going on here. Like we maybe we'll see some themes between the two of us.
I think there will definitely be some themes popping their heads, especially for some of mine, a general main idea. But we'll get to that in a moment. But yeah, it's going to be, I think, interesting because you are known for your exquisite taste.
Hmm. Well, I mean, according to me, but that's me.
I just want to know what critic would dare disagree with you.
Oh, I can think. According to this list, many, 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 many.
Well, I think based on what I know about you, if they said something that you disagree with, chances are they're the ones that's wrong.
Hey, I definitely could very much hop on to that way of thinking. That's not a bad one. That's good. So let's see. Last week, I think, did I go first last week or did you go first?
I went first last week.
Okay, so do I have to go first this week? I'll
It
go.
seems you would have to go first this week.
All right. Okay, so just so that you know, and this is I feel like this is important to say. Um because understanding what critic reviews are is kind of like it's very difficult, especially now, because for some movies, of course, we weren't around when these movies came out, or we are only sort of getting like we see it through a lens which is slightly different from what was, um and we're definitely not always thinking about uh a movie at, like, in the contextual way that it was released when it was released. So I'm just going to say that because I think that it's important to make sure that we understand that, the critic score is the critic score that was at the time that it was released. And I feel like that's kind of important. Um, because if I don't say it that way, people will say, but I mean, people love this movie now. What's wrong? And yeah, that's very true. Okay, so I'm going to go with this movie as my number 10. Forever in a Day, I have loved the movie Conan the Destroyer. It stars Arnold Schwarzenegger. It has a whole bunch of interesting ideas happening. Um, there are it's sword and sorcery. It's the second of the Conan movies. The first Conan movie is widely loved by everyone, and that actually has a super baby James Earl Jones in it. But in this one, we have Grace Jones, we have Sarah Douglas, we have a lot of people who were sort of staples of 80s films. Now, I think the thing that makes this movie in particular bad for the critics, which I'll just touch on kind of quick, is yeah, the critics think that it was perhaps just a bunch of, cheesy special effects and really nothing special about the movie, that it was just kind of like a series of little questy things, and that it feels, in fact, one critic said uh that Mystery Science Theater would probably salivate at doing this movie. So I mean, that's pretty, that's big. um okay, but I look at this through a different lens. I look at this as a just a quest. It's like a Dungeons and Dragons quest. Save the princess, fight the monsters, lots of sort of like side interesting little find a new character. Everybody gets to shine at least once. To me, this is just a good, well, quest isn't even really the right word, but to me this is just like it's the traveling troupe, it's the RPG trope, and it's fun. There are cheesy dialogue lines in here, and there are really kind of bad special effects, but it doesn't matter because this is the kind of movie where you're not watching it for the special effects. You are watching it for big burly Conan the Destroyer and his sidekicks who do goofy things. It's just fun, and it's fun to watch too, especially if you like this kind of fantasy genre. It's just fun to watch. So my number 10 pick is Conan the Destroyer, released in 19, I want to say it was like 84. I think it was 84. Yep.
84, yeah.
1984. And for all of its wonderful camp, it still is pretty great. Now, just one more thing. Uh, audiences and critics hated this movie. Audience score aggregate right now, I think, is like at 38%. Critic score is like at 26% or even lower sometimes. That does not turn me off in any way. I still love this movie. I'll fight for this movie. So, number 10, Conan the Destroyer.
I assume it's a good pick because I've not seen it.
Aw, I mean, if you watched it, you'd go, "Oh my god, this is so campy." But it doesn't, it reminds me in a good way of our old cinema du fromage days when we used to choose movies that were super cheesy and discuss them, and sometimes go, "Hey, that wasn't such a bad movie at all." Yeah, that's what this gives me. Those vibes.
Well, my number 10 is one that is also universally panned.
Oh no.
Yes. And once you hear it, you're going to be like, but yeah, Josh, that deserves it. And I
Oh
say
no.
nay.
Oh no.
Just because the movie stars the weasel doesn't mean that it deserves to be disrespected like that. My number 10 from 1995 is Jury Duty, otherwise known as the only other Tia Carrera movie that I've watched.
Wow.
What am I supposed to be like prolifically knowledgeable of what she does outside of Wayne's World?
No. No. No.
To me, it's like other than this movie, that's the only thing she's ever done. I'm sure that she might have an IMDb full of credits, but nope. For me, it's this in Wayne's World, and I gotta say, I loved Jury Duty. What is it? Well, imagine 12 Angry Men, except instead of, delaying the process to find justice, there's a guy that's delaying the process because he's getting paid to do so very minimally, you know? So that is the basic idea of Jury Duty in a nutshell. And of course, once you let's face it, Pauly Shore movies were their own genre in the 90s. It really became its own thing, and quite frankly, I think it's time for another one. Nothing, crazy theatrical release, just a nice little straight to streaming follow-up to any of his movies, any of them I think would have great, like the sequel to Jury Duty would be, Tommy Collins becomes a judge. That because by the end of it he's like enamored with the law because it's so interesting to him, and that's his journey for the movie is not in the case of 12 Angry Men, like I said, because you kind of have to make the comparison since they're both movies about juries. You make the comparison because in 12 Angry Men you have like I said, a search for truth, and this is just the search for a delay to stay sequestered for as long as possible because it's a better way of life for Pauly Shore's character. But the journey where he, his initial want changes into an actual interest in the case and trying to figure out exactly what happened, not because of his original desire, but because now his curiosity speaks and he comes to this sort of realization that he's uh, interested in law and interested in justice and interested in finding the truth, and it leads him and down this path that can be just a tad bit dangerous at times until eventually everything kind of wraps up the way a Pauly Shore movie does, where the the slacker, goofy looking dude winds up getting the girl, and everybody lives happily ever after. But does it break any ground? No. Does it uh, does it do anything new for comedy? Not so much. But putting the Polly Shore genre inside um, a courtroom, I think, was enough to make this enjoyable for me. And quite frankly, I'm the one whose opinion matters the most to me. The critics have it at a, hold on, let me see if I can read this right. Yes, 0%. It has a 0%
Okay, that's bad.
and an audience score of 26%.
Ooh. Oh, that hurts.
So it's considered bad. But what the last thing I'm going to say about this is um, one thing that I think critics don't really keep in mind is the audience that it's aiming for. Because more often than not, a movie like this isn't going to land for critics, because critics are, of course, trained to look for certain things, and you know story beats and way things are shot. Critics are supposed to have, I guess, a finer taste. Well, you know what? Critics can enjoy a filet mignon. Um, Regular Joes can enjoy a cheeseburger from McDonald's, because the things aren't made for everybody. And I think if there was more of a focus on getting people to review movies that are sort of more marketed towards them, then movies like Jury Duty would, no doubt, drastically. Well, with that 26% audience score, maybe not drastically, but movies like this would have a better chance of seeing in a better light. It's like, if you're reviewing video games and you hate puzzle games, why would you be sent to review The Witness? A straight up puzzle game. It's nothing but puzzles. Person's not going to give it a high score because they're going to be like, I hate puzzle games. Wah. So, Pauly Shore movies aren't for everybody, but they're for me. And that's all that matters. Jury Duty, my number 10.
Sweet. That was actually pretty good. That was very, very good. Okay.
Thank you.
Moving into my number 9 position is Blade Trinity. Uh, Man, did people ever hate Blade Trinity? Whew, it was pretty bad. But I'm gonna say that Blade Trinity was actually pretty amazing to me for a number of different reasons. One, because the snark and the sarcasm was hilarious. Two, what critics didn't like about Blade Trinity was kind of everything. But what critics didn't really like about Blade Trinity was that it didn't offer anything new to the Blade, um, to what was now already the Blade franchise. Um, but Ryan Reynolds is in this, and Ryan, I don't know, Ryan Reynolds can't help but be snarky, and I think that that's actually pretty good. It's like that's the smart way to play this. Blade is just Blade. There's, there honestly, if you're looking for range of emotion out of Blade, I feel like you're looking at the wrong movie. The supporting cast has to be everything else because that's just the way it is. But I liked this. I liked the silliness of it because it didn't take itself so seriously, and so it was able to accomplish things that I think the previous Blade movie definitely didn't get to. And it also kind of opened up some doors, which I really liked. And I will get to my sort of, you know, there's another movie that falls right in line with this that I think is like it's weird how similar a vibe I get from these two movies. But for Blade itself, I feel like I feel like one of the most interesting things that I hear about Blade Trinity in particular is that people felt like it didn't, like, it lacked a kind of cohesive center. Like the movie itself didn't deliver an actual story, and I disagree. I think it actually did, but I think you have to let. I think all franchises have to allow for a bit of comic relief, or not even comic relief, but the ability to not take itself so seriously, which the later Marvel movies did very successfully. But at the time that this was released, we hadn't quite embraced that yet. And it was like everything had to be so serious, everything had to be so, you know, well, this is vampire. It's got to be like super serious and super terrible and super dark. And it didn't. I don't know. I feel like they kind of missed the point of some of it. So it's definitely not a highly intellectual, broad metaphor movie that has lots of different story elements and deep characters. And I mean, it feels very on the surface, but for Blade, I don't know if we need so much more from that story other than to tell and retell what Blade is doing, because at this time there were no tie-ins to any other universes. So Blade's existence was just in the Blade universe. And as a vampire hunter, um you know, it's not just that there's only so many ways you can go. That's the wrong way to say it. I think people expected a little bit too much out of this for what it was supposed to be. I read a whole bunch of critics that said that they thought that the whole idea of this movie was to be as stupid as possible. And again, I think that that is being kind of disingenuous. It's not that it was supposed to be stupid. It's that a movie about vampire hunters is not always supposed to be super serious. It's supposed to allow for elements of, this is the ridiculousness of this. And it was kind of mocking itself in ways. I mean, and truly mocking itself, like making the vampire dog. I mean, it's clear that the writers were mocking the material in sort of like a almost self-aware way. Um, I actually love all the performances. Wesley Snipes is always such an awesome Blade. But on the scale, while it's probably the weakest of the Blade movies, it isn't the worst. It's not terrible. It's just, yeah, it doesn't move a whole lot of things forward, but standing by itself, it's actually pretty good. So I am going to add Blade Trinity as my number 9 pick.
And not once did you mention Triple H.
I did not. No, no, no. We'll leave some things out there.
All right, as a
Have you seen it? Have you seen Blade Trinity?
yeah, of course.
Yeah, I feel like everybody has seen, or at least seen excerpts of it.
As a young wrestling fan, it was interesting to see old Triple H, Hunter Hearst Helmsley on the screen for the first time,
He was good too. He had a lot of presence.
as he is known for.
Hmm.
So yeah, I'm gonna say great, terrible choice.
It's a B movie that is not trying to disguise itself as anything other than a B movie. I think that's the best way to describe it.
Yeah, it did. I don't think it tried to elevate the genre, but it certainly didn't do a. It didn't make a half-hearted attempt at the movie either.
No, and it furthered, or I shouldn't say furthered, but it entrenched some of the ideas that we already knew were going on, but Blade Trinity kind of drove them home. Like, if you thought that this was what was happening, guess what? You're right. This is exactly what's happening, and we'll show you. That was good. I thought that that was actually pretty good. So,
Well, not that you mentioned Ryan Reynolds in it. That makes me think he he must have been in more comic book franchises than anybody at this point because
Yeah.
he Blade, uh, X Men, uh, what was it? X Men Origins Wolverine,
Yep.
that terrible, terrible Deadpool, and then Deadpool, and then Green Lantern.
Oh yeah, Green Lantern.
This guy, it seems like people when it comes to superheroes and Ryan Reynolds, they were just like, just do Deadpool, like the real Deadpool, not that Wolverine shtick. Just do that. We're just immediately not going to like you until you're the actual Deadpool.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. Um. So once again, commend you. So I guess that brings me to my number 9.
It does. Yes, indeed.
Wow, we're two in, almost half hour into the show. Whew.
Yeah, step up the pace, Josh. What the heck?
Yes. My number 9 is a film based on the classic story, The Most Dangerous Game. And you would think, well, it's a great story. How could anybody mess that up, right? How could that be considered bad by anybody? Well, apparently, because it has, checking my notes here, I have notes. How about that? Checking my notes here, it has a 4% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes. Yeah, 4. Critics did not like the fact that it was a story based on The Most Dangerous Game starring John Leguizamo. I am, of course, talking about The Pest from 1997. Now, I already gave away one of the reasons why I absolutely adore this movie because it's based on a great story about man hunting man, the most dangerous game. Now, what I find endearing about this is the fact that one, John Leguizamo plays a really annoying guy, um, and that's the reason why the hunter wants to hunt him. At first he's like, I will hunt a great athlete, and then he meets what's his name, Pistario, and just says, "Fine, I'll kill this guy because he's a pest. He's bothersome." And throughout the movie, it sets up a lot of comedic devices throughout, not just the hunt, but pre-hunt with the Scottish mafia. Yeah, who knew there was a Scottish mafia? But they're on full display here, and that's who the past owes money to, and that's why he agrees to be hunted. What I don't get is when it comes to these movies, a lot of the times, a character will get into a predicament, say they're in debt a certain amount of money, and then conveniently they're offered that same amount of money to do something crazy or insanely stupid. And I'm like, but would you really do something that crazy just for the chance to break even? That's neither here nor there. But The Past is one of those movies that I could watch repeatedly because I am a huge, huge John Leguizamo fan, and really enjoyed his late '90s comedy. You might remember a TV show that was post in living color called House of Buggin. Also, hilarious, too short lived, and I don't know. I don't know. It's got a great musical number in the beginning, which I'm always a sucker for. It got some money, a little bit of money behind it. It's just fun. It's just a fun movie, and even though it has a 4%, I love it, and that's why it's my number 9.
I mean, that's good. I feel like that's actually a pretty good choice, to be honest. Um, I love the disparities between all of these, between what critics like and what audiences like. But I think that some of the movies, especially as I move up my list, they get more on the side of, hey, critics didn't like them, but audiences did. Not just me, but actual audiences liked the movie. So that's kind of, I find some of these to be sort of interesting that way.
Mhm.
My number eight is a movie that at the time that this movie came out, I was really surprised that that critics didn't like it, because I thought that it was not perfect. I will definitely not go with the perfect scenario, but I was very intrigued by what they visually brought to the Umbrella Corporation. I am talking about Resident Evil, of course. And just so that you know, right, I'm going to say what Rotten Tomatoes gives it, because I feel like this is maybe one of the better sort of ideas that you get about how this kind of works. So, Resident Evil as a movie back in 2002 got 35% on Rotten Tomatoes. Now, Resident Evil was based on a video game. It's one of the, I think, most successful franchises based on video games in terms of movie spawn, right? So it spawned a whole bunch of movies. It also spawned a series on Netflix. It's got a lot of, it was very influential. And it became very almost, permeated the zeitgeist because Umbrella Corporation kind of started to stand in for, the corporate mega world where bad things can happen, and not just do bad things happen, but they control so much of what we experience that it starts to feel like there's no escaping it. And you begin to see that in later Resident Evil movies. But the first one was just really okay, well, what is Umbrella Corporation? What is the T virus? And what's happening in this place called the Hive? And, if you've played the video games Resident Evil, a lot of it is basically killing zombies, chasing or becoming chase material, trying not to get eaten, discovering different clues, learning how to navigate the entire underground world. It's very cool. It's a great video game. And I can't say that I was like, "Oh yeah, this is exactly like the video game" when I saw the movie, but I thought that their ideas were really good, especially um I think especially the cast definitely made it work. But it was a simple, fast moving, easy movie that did everything it was supposed to do, a la video game style, and then a little bit more. Like, give us a little bit of information about how and where we're going to move next with the Genesis project and things like that. Um, I I really loved Resident Evil when I saw it in the theaters, and I have not stopped liking Resident Evil as we have moved forward. It's still a really solid go-to movie when I'm looking for something that is video game fun. And once again, Resident Evil, although it doesn't take itself, super, super seriously, it takes itself seriously enough that it invested in those full suits for the dogs. Some of the dogs are CGI, but some of them are just big dogs with these huge zombie suits on them. Like, the practical effects in Resident Evil make it really good. The sets are really cool, especially the sets that have water in them. They're fun. I mean, this is a cool movie to watch. So critics didn't like it. I think a lot of critics don't actually play video games, or at least many don't. Um, some people didn't like it because they were like, "Well, it's too gory." I hear a lot of criticism of the lasers in the hall before he gets to the Red Queen, because lasers come down the hall and basically chop people in half, and they were really upset why did that need to be in there. um other critics really hated it because they thought that it was unimaginative and things like that. Now, I don't think that. And a couple of critics even said, hey, game fans aren't going to like this. That's not true, though, because game fans did like it. And game fans were like, okay, well, I mean, maybe this isn't Resident Evil as we know it, but this is solid. Also, I just have to give a huge shout out to Michelle Rodriguez. I still quote her lines from this movie to this day. I love everything about her character in this movie. Audiences gave this movie a 67%. So 67% to 35% for critics, that's a pretty big disparity. And I think it goes to show that, in some ways, critics don't always think about what the general John Q. public want in any given genre because they are basing some of their information off of criteria that doesn't quite meet the level that audiences are judging the movies for. And I think that this is apparent in all of our choices so far. So, Resident Evil is my number 8.
We're just going to copy and paste most of what you said on my next one. Even though it's not Resident Evil, it is a video game movie.
Ooh, I have another video game movie on mine too. I wonder if this is a crossover.
I hope so, because it's one that I can't wrap my head around
Oh,
when I see the critics score, and I see that it's listed as rotten
ooh,
at 59%. Now, mind you, that's closer to mixed, but still, it's rotten, and also managed to cross the $1 billion mark.
oh wow.
I'm talking about the Super Mario Brothers movie.
Okay, so that's not on my list, but honestly, because I didn't get a chance to. I didn't actually process that into this list, but I think that that is an excellent example of exactly what I was just talking about. So yes,
That's why I said
completely agree.
copy and paste everything you said, apply it to Super Mario Brothers, and you realize I don't know what they were looking for when they were watching this movie, but I was looking for some Nintendo nostalgia, some Mario. I just wanted to see Mario, and then
Mm.
more Mario, throw in some Luigi, dash Donkey Kong, then give me some more freaking Mario, and it was exquisite from the changing of the basic story, which I dug. It wasn't, oh no, Mario has to save the princess. Nope, princess is saving Mario like all the time.
Right.
Um, Luigi's the one that's sort of in peril because they got separated heading into the Mushroom Kingdom. Minor spoilers, but just the idea that you can see this movie and not know exactly what it is and then rate it according to that just baffles me. Right now, it sits at a 96% audience approval rating.
Wow.
96 from the audience, 59 from the critics. It blows my mind. The audience knows what this is, and they signed on for it. They didn't just sign on for it; they're breaking records showing up to watch this movie. And even with all the, well, you got that Chris what's his face guy doing the voice of Mario. Don't you think that's kind of dumb? You know what? Worked for me. Worked for me. And quite frankly, I don't know what else I can say because I'm pretty sure that everybody out there listening to this, hearing me saying, yeah, the critics didn't like the Super Mario Brothers movie, are just as baffled as me. And they're going, yeah, you're right, Josh. We love that movie and can't understand why it 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 qualifies for this list. It should never have gotten a poor review ever. But here we are. Super Mario Brothers movie is my number 8. So to the critics, I say How dare you?
I mean, same. I don't know what they were looking for, but I don't think it was. It's not what everybody else was looking for. So yeah, that one actually kind of baffles me. Um, as does my next choice. My number seven is a movie which everybody who's ever played a video game will know, or will have an idea of what this is, and how deep the mythos is, because Silent Hill has an extraordinarily complex mythology, and it is basically untangled throughout a series of games. It's very complicated. There's a lot going on. And there's a lot that the movie did not do right. They mixed things up. They created characters which are in the video game, but didn't make sense in the movie where they actually were. Like they just sort of, clearly whoever did the adaptation had a good idea about what to do, but they didn't quite get it, or maybe somebody overrode them and said, no, you got to use this, you got to use that, because this is what's going to make our audiences fall in love with this concept. It was kind of weird. But Silent Hill gets an insanely good Rotten Tomato score for the critics, or from, I'm sorry, from the audience, not from the critics. Um, from the critics, it gets a 31%, and once again, audiences, it got a 63%. Um, which, I mean, isn't like, oh, that's not 80%, but I feel like enough people understood what Silent Hill was supposed to be about, and the people who were basically the critics of this movie either didn't understand what the either they didn't understand what was supposed to be happening, which is basically duality, right? And it's duality on multiple fronts. It's not just duality like, okay, there's Silent Hill the place, and then there's Silent Hill the alternate reality, because things happen in the alternate reality that actually affect the place that is Silent Hill. And if you, again, if you play the games, you sort of understand. Now, what happened was, I think the Silent Hill movie started to, or tried to capture on all of the sort of fan favorite things. And I think audiences actually rewarded them for that by saying, yay, the nurses were in the basement, the nurses that only move if you're not looking at them. I mean, if you are looking at them, when you are looking at them, they have to stay frozen. The moment that you turn away from them, they start to move. It's so creepy. It's so creepy. There's a lot of Pyramid Head, who is sort of iconic in this movie, is actually not really supposed to be a part of the movie the way that they have him in, but it doesn't matter. People were still excited to see an embodiment of what is Pyramid Head, and that was cool. There's also the sort of inner circle, the idea of this whole thing as being a ritualized witch hunt in some ways, that kind of, it gave life to a whole bunch of other ideas inside of Silent Hill, other than just what was happening in the basement of the hospital. I mean, I won't give, if you haven't seen Silent Hill or if you haven't played the games, then none of this will make any sense. But if you have played Silent Hill, if you do like the games, then the movie does a bit of a service. It's a weird service, but it does a bit of a service to the games simply by calling out all of the fan favorite moments. The little soot babies. Oh god, those are so creepy. That part of the movie still creeps me out so much. The the just sort of some of the other pieces of Silent Hill, which we all know exist, and everybody was wanting to see visualized. And even if it doesn't make total sense in the story, it was still awesome to see these things come to the screen. So I always get confused on this one because I don't really understand what people were looking for here other than other than they didn't understand what the purpose of the movie was for. The purpose of this movie was not to be it was to be fan service for the games. And I think that that actually does work here. I'm just confused about why the critics thought this movie was boring, why they thought it didn't work, why they thought, the characters were not well cast. Why did they have to have somebody looking for them in the real world? Like, all of these criticisms are sort of like, well, you don't understand then what Silent Hill really is about. So anyway, Silent Hill from 2006 becomes my number 7 choice.
I haven't seen it.
Oh, really? Have you ever
Yeah,
played Have you ever played Silent Hill?
I started to once, but that was like way back when. Yeah.
I gotta say, the only game that I played that I liked more than Silent Hill was the two. I think there's two of them. Fear games. Fear was one of my favorite games to play, and then Fear 2 was absolutely blew Fear out of the water. And it has a lot of similar sort of themes with, Alma being the uh uh psi influence, and then those really creepy zombies that come to attack, but only during moments when Alma is sort of conscious and awake. It's crazy. It's really good. But I feel but I feel really similar to the way that Silent Hill is, that, look, if you like this kind of mythos, you're gonna love a video game adaptation. But if you don't like it, you're gonna be like, well, what is this all about? This, thumbs down. This is terrible. What are you doing?
Yeah, I get maybe, and that's a point that can't be stressed enough. As far as if you're not here for this before walking in, then this movie's not for you.
Yeah, yeah.
So maybe I'm just saying maybe a little exemption from certain critics would be awesome.
Probably. I'm thinking so too. So where are you on your number 7?
Well, my number 7 is one that it surprised me because doing research. Hey, I did research um, about things that critics didn't like versus things that I liked. There were a lot of interesting results that just kind of blew my mind, and this is one of them. Whereas I thought everybody liked this movie, and turns out, nope, critics did not, because receiving a 56% on Rotten Tomatoes, having a rotten score, a rotten consensus, is 2021's Don't Look Up. Now, I'm just in general a fan of Armageddon films. Also, just in general, a fan of Adam McKay. And just in general, a fan of pretty much everybody in this movie. And I watched it, absolutely adored it. Um, some critique it for being a little heavy-handed with its messaging, and to me, that wasn't that wasn't a flaw. That was a feature, because it's gotten to the point where maybe Adam McKay is not being subtle with what he's trying to say anymore, because quite frankly, some people just aren't getting it. They're not looking at some of his other movies and going, wait, are we the bad guys? And in this movie, he's flat out saying, uh, things are going poorly, and it's because of you, and it's because of you, and it's because of you. Without any kind of hesitation. And this, I know some people looked at it and they're like, oh, it's a liberal this or it's a conservative that. No, Adam McKay does, I think, a terrific job of just straight up pointing the finger of blame where it needs to be uh, pointed. And the really strange part about this movie is the fact that not only was it released, you know, during pandemic time, but it wasn't about the pandemic. No, this story was written well before that was a thing for everybody. But the idea that this movie was written and then gets made and then gets released uh, during COVID, and then we see all of these crazy parallels to what's actually going on in the world. Um, might maybe that makes it seem a little heavy-handed, like, oh, he is just definitely you know uh, taking the piss out of these people. It's like, well, no, it's sort of like these people landed in the movie that he had already planned and made. So not quite the flow of direction that anybody's actually thinking. Anyway, Don't Look Up. If you're not familiar, it is the story of an asteroid discovered by a scientist played by Leonardo DiCaprio, who sort of sounds the alert and says, "Hey, there's an asteroid coming," and that, of course, leads half the population to go, "Holy crap, we could all die if we don't do something," and the other half to go, "Well, we'll just pretend that it's not there." And it gets its title from the idea that if you don't look up, it's not there. Essentially, uh, that's that's it in a nutshell. It is so funny. It is so spot on with uh, what what was happening even before it happened. It just started nailing all of these situations. Um, I love it. And in fact, it's probably going to be on a rewatch for me soon. Don't Look Up gets my number uh, 7. Um, Wonderful movie.
That's a good one.
I
I,
think
I
so
think
too.
yeah, I think that was actually that, and that's I think I think your explanation is about what makes it good is actually pretty uh contradictory to what I think most critics were thinking about it, which is always interesting because it's always funny to me when I hear what people liked about movies versus what people then ended up what critics ended up scoring it on. And to me, there's probably no greater source of this than um, ebert.com, where there's a lot of critics that v- I think, interestingly enough, create some kind of, I don't know, almost an intellectual wall around the true point of entertainment, which is to be entertained. And sometimes I feel like, holding our entertainment to standards which are, first of all, not always evenly applied. Like, you cannot always apply. There are some things that always apply to every movie, right? A movie can have a good score, and that is absolutely true. So if Bear McCreary is doing your score, you're good, right? Because Bear McCreary does zero scores for movies that aren't amazing, and also TV series too. Hello, Walking Dead. Um, but and Black Sails. Um, but then there are things that are incredibly subjective, and oftentimes critics seem to use these rather fixed points without applying the subjective nature of being a critic of a movie to them. And I don't understand that because I don't look at every movie the same way. I look at them very I don't go to a James Bond movie and apply what I want from uh a Downton Abbey. I'm looking for something totally different. So my idea about what will make this movie good is completely different. And I don't see that like across the board. I feel like more and more critics are applying these sort of very fixed ideas about what makes a movie good or bad. So with that, now this movie veers from my did audiences like it and did critics like it? In this case, the critics actually liked it slightly more than the audience, but God, I don't understand what was going on here. Um, this movie, released in 1987, is called The Gate. It is about some kids. Think about Stranger Things before Stranger Things, and a little bit more centric. So they open up a gateway to hell in their backyard. There is and part of the reason that I mentioned soundtrack is because there is a great soundtrack that goes along with this. It's very heavy metal. It's awesome. It's just fabulous. It fits everything. There, there's little tiny claymation demons that come out of the gate. There is an urban legend about a guy being stuck in the walls, which ends up sort of coming to fruition. There is this sort of idea overall that the kids can save the world, and honestly, it's fun. I mean, if you like Stranger Things, you would love The Gate. It is not a bad movie. It's actually a really good movie that I think, especially when this movie came out, people didn't like it because it didn't seem to fit any kind of didn't really fit the genre of the day. Just wasn't sort of like it wasn't in vogue for what was being put out there. Um I don't know if you know who Steven Dorff is, but he's been in a lot of other stuff too. And he plays this character named Glenn. And Glenn, as a little kid, he steals the whole show. It's just absolutely amazing. I I feel like this is the kind of movie that inspired uh shows like Stranger Things. So it's hard for me to understand why, with Stranger Things being so popular, people didn't like The Gate. But one of the things that somebody will say, like of the critic sort of consensus, um, is that it feels like it's too like too many people have done this before, and I feel like that's so disingenuous because this movie was released in 1987, and you may think that now there's a lot of these kinds of movies out there, but this movie was 1987. There weren't a lot of these movies before this. And so that particular criticism just does not hold water. Um, I think also the thing that people didn't like is that, yes, the special effects are not all that great. There's definitely a lot more practical effects than good CG. But again, I point to the time frame and just say, I'm not. It's not Star Wars, it's a lower budget film, but the effects are still not terrible. And for that, I feel like, yeah, this is actually it's not it's not bad. It's actually, I think, a really good movie. So other thing that I'm going to say about this movie is, even though both the critics and the audience didn't like it, I think that the reason that people didn't like this movie, first of all, it has a much lower watch rate. So, like, there's a certain amount of people that watch a movie and then they give their consensus, and it should be pretty steady, whether you have 5,000 ratings or whether you have 10,000 ratings, but that's not always necessarily true. There's only 11 critic reviews for The Gate, and that also tells me that, hey, not a lot of people watched this. So it may be that this particular movie could really move up if more people watched it. Okay, so I'm without saying too much more about the gate. Kids save the world. They open a portal to hell in their backyard. Crazy stuff happens. It's fun. Definitely worth a watch. The Gate, 1987.
I haven't seen this, but I knew it would be on your list.
Did you really? Okay.
I did.
I think I've mentioned this movie actually before.
You have, and I listened. So, yay me!
And Steven Dorff is he's so fun in this movie, and he's so little. He's such a little boy. And he has gone on to do some amazing things. He did a movie called Ned King, which is incredibly well rated. A movie called Old Henry. Old Henry is unbelievably awesome. He was in I Shot Andy Warhol. He was in what was that other movie that he was in? Oh, Public Enemies. That's the one that I know him from the most. So I mean, like you can. It's always fun to me to watch movies where some of our famous actors now, where they kind of got their start, and this is definitely one of those. So it's really fun.
I always love me a good kids in peril movie.
It really, yeah, yeah. I think if you're a Gen Xer, this movie will cut right to the chase because it's everything that we all grew up with, and I think that that might be nostalgically why I like it, but just subjectively, I also think there's a reason that a lot of people love Stranger Things, and Stranger Things' audience is not Gen Xers completely as like the only audience, and the if you like that kind of movie, then The Gate is definitely in that it's in that genre. It's right there. So, yeah.
Well,
Anyway.
my number six might appeal to the same generation, eh, but definitely not the same subject matter
Oh, okay.
because it is one of those few movies based on pre-existing IP that I think successfully made the transition from the small screen to the big screen.
Ooh.
I am talking about 1994's The Flintstones.
Okay.
I get it. I was 12 years old when it came out, and it had John Goodman and Rick Moranis. And what's I mean, you got two guys that every 12-year-old is gonna be a fan of, right? Playing characters that we grew up watching on from the Flintstones, and to see this cartoon brought to life with such amazing set design and costume design. I I was a kid and I absolutely fell in love with this movie. I've seen it so many times. It's I couldn't even begin to tell you how many times I saw it. But John Goodman is Fred Flintstone, Rick Moranis is Barney Rubble, Elizabeth Perkins as Wilma, and Rosie O'Donnell as Betty. It's it's cheesy to the max, but I think, like we've been saying, without saying, context is king. It's one of the mottos of the podcast when it comes to talking about anything. Context is everything. The Flintstones was definitely not a movie made for critics. Believe it or not, there are movies that aren't made for critics. And yet critics seem to get pissy whenever these movies exist. So they give them low scores. Right now, let's see, I'm going to look at my notes. 21%. The Flintstones has a 21% on Rotten Tomatoes. which is crazy low in my opinion, and definitely wasn't reviewed by my peers. Um, the Flintstones does everything you want uh, in a movie of this style, and it is made for the kids that grew up watching the show, and perhaps even the adults at the time that grew up watching the show. After all, the show, the Flintstones itself, had been running, I believe, literally forever. Was it as good as the Adams Family? You know what? It's. I don't think that's a fair comparison to make. I know I'm the one that brought it up, but I think what a lot of people will be asking is, well, they made the Adams Family, and they did it without the sort of schmaltz that um, some say irritated them about the classic TV series. They took the sitcom and made it cinema, and that completely 100% true. The Adams Family movies were brilliant, but I say when it comes to the Flintstones, they took the cartoon and all they did was take away the animation, but still gave us the cartoon. And in my opinion, that is absolutely okay. I did not need any kind of reimagining of the Flintstones. I did not need any kind of, serious undertones of the Flintstones. I just needed to see a cartoon brought to life. And when it came to every piece of that movie, as I mentioned before, set designs, acting, it was all over the top. It was all on point for what a live action cartoon should be. And it's a real shame that that kind of thing is almost shamed for even existing, for making the attempt to do um, an accurate live action cartoon. We've seen live action cartoon esque things before. What the, what was that movie? The Great Race. That's a live action cartoon, absolutely. But this is the Flintstones. It has a style. It has a a unique way of telling its own stories, especially in the this is sort of traditional sitcom but cartoon, and now it became uh, live action cartoon. And I just think they did everything exactly right with this movie. The Flintstones is my number six. Um, Unabashedly, I love it.
Nice. I also find a lot of fun in the Flintstones. It was not a bad movie. It was just it was supposed to be exactly what it was, which is
Hmm.
why I think it almost relates right back to Super Mario and Resident Evil. It's just it was supposed to be exactly what it was.
It had a cameo from the BC-52s.
Yeah, which also was amazing. Love that. Um, okay. This movie that I'm going to talk about right now was panned by both critics and audiences alike. Again, this is a very small sampling, although there are more critics that have reviews here with 21 than audience. Audience score or audience reviews is only at 500. So that's kind of a small sampling, and it makes me think that well, I know actually that this movie was not it didn't have a super wide release, and I think that might be one problem that the movie has. The movie is called Dark Was the Night. uh Dark Was the Night is basically an eco terror story. Eco terror story in that this logging company cuts down a forest, and all of a sudden some really crazy things begin to happen, violent and horrible. And it's I won't give a whole lot away about this movie, because if you want to watch it, I kind of hope you do. I don't want to say, like, I don't want to explain every single thing away, because it is a horror movie, and so obviously there's always these like little threads that they're better if you watch them instead of somebody telling you about them. But I will say that one of the things that I really liked about this movie was, despite the fact that it didn't have, eco-terrorism is, or, well, it's not eco-terrorism, it's eco-horror. Because it's not, yes, they cut down the forest, and yes, that was the wrong thing to do according to the movie, but this is stuff that exists in our world, in the organic world as we know it, and we're just not aware of it. And so it kind of preys on the idea that, sometimes there you just need a catalyst to bring out some of the more frightful and very horrible things that humans do to other humans. And it makes it very fascinating to me that the movie spins off of that presence, despite the fact that what's really happening is something wide with this horror, with the horror theme of this thing that is permeating uh the humans that get infected. It's a crazy movie. um Another thing that I really liked about it is it hits the exact right atmospheric tone. There's a lot of deep filter work here, and it makes everything feel as if it is darker and grittier than even you might experience it normally. Like, visually, it's got a very sort of muted tone, which is kind of great. I love it. um I one of the critics Okay, one of the critics reviews, right, says this as his opening line, and I'm not even kidding. The movie's title is Dark Was the Night, and his opening line was, "I mean, what else is the night supposed to be?" And, like, I mean, come on. That, to me, that is just, there's a bunch of those that are like that in here. Like, you didn't even give it a chance, and I don't really understand. The One of the other titles is, as generic as its title, Monster in the Woods film aspires to be the stuff of nightmares, but instead merely lulls the viewers into an untroubled sleep. I didn't find that to be true at all. Um, but I also think that deeper themes have to be really thought about. And I hate to say it, because, I tend to put critics in or on a slightly higher pedestal than myself when it comes to reviewing movies. But in some cases, and this is one of them, I find that they have a very disturbing lack of clarity. And I don't feel like they put on their intellectual big boy and big girl pants to look at story with all of its thematic grandness through metaphor and, through very big ideas. And they instead choose to focus on the most snarky, the most, subtle little jabs that they can. And it just makes me feel like, well, this is what 10th graders would do. And I expect so much more. And reading their reviews, again, just gives me like, okay, you just didn't like it, but you didn't give any reason for really backing that up, other than, well, this didn't feel right to me. I didn't like. There's no, there's no sort of like attention to the wider stuff, which it just really bothers me. If I were writing reviews, that's what I would do. Um, the other thing that I really liked about Dark Was the Night is there is a it is definitely a small budget movie. And it works on a small budget scale. So when you walk into this movie, you have to feel sort of you have to have the understanding that it's going to feel a little bit smaller in scope than a big budget movie. But this is so often the thing that happens in horror movies, and I'm just going to call this out before I get to my the next four, because they're almost all horror movies except for my number one. um Horror movies get reviewed terribly, and I do mean terribly, like ridiculously bad. Unless you're like sinister, or unless you're, something kind of groundbreaking with an Ethan Hawke or something like that. Um, Horror movies, either people are not understanding the idea that horror is often personal metaphor, or they are looking for something that can't happen in the horror genre. And for that, we end up with so many really good horror movies that get absolutely slapped around by critics. And it doesn't really make any sense to me, other than I do feel like there is a terrible bias, especially with top level critics and horror and the genre of horror. That's one of the reasons that I love to push the streaming service Shudder so much, because Shudder is horror fans reviewing horror movies. And that makes all the difference, because if you're a horror fan, you are going to look for something totally different in the genre than you are if you are watching, as an example, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, which feels a little bit horror inside of it, but it's more just a really good, solid movie that came from a time, quite some time ago. Anyway, uh, Dark Was the Night is my number five, and I'm sorry for that very long rant, but I feel like I just needed to get that out there, because number four, number three, and number two are all horror movies, and this becomes a consistent theme.
Was that the Dark Was the Night in 2014?
I believe it is 2014. Yes, 2014.
Excellent. And wanted to make sure that I got the right one on the list,
Or
which you can find
Letterbox.
on Letterbox. 1021 Pod. This one, Jen's list, is called Jen's Critics Tears.
Oh, that's really a good title.
Mine is called Josh's Critics Tears, because they're going to see these lists and go, "We were wrong. We were wrong."
The other thing, which I'm just going to say off the top here, is I think sometimes people use critic scores as a little bit too much of a guidepost for whether they should go see a movie or see a movie or not. Like, you going around Amazon Prime, checking on Netflix, and then you find a movie and then you look it up and you look at the score and you go, no, maybe not. But honestly, I don't think that that always applies, because sometimes I have taken chances on movies that have had really bad critic scores or really bad audience scores, and I loved it. So, you know, yeah, just take it with a grain of salt.
I will, just being honest with you here, as I'm apt to do, and taking photos. Um, Beautiful. Uh, I don't check reviews until after I watch a movie.
Oh, that's smart. That's very smart.
In fact, that's the first thing I do when I watch a movie. After I watch it, it's not that I check the reviews, but I log into Letterboxd and add it to my diary that I watched the movie, um, and then I kind of check to see how I rated it versus how everybody else rated it. Not that I'm particularly worried, or not that it would change my opinion on a movie, but sometimes I'm surprised, like, why did they like it more than me? Or why did they like it less than me? That's weird.
Mm.
But it's just kind of a sort of a metric to see where my opinion lines up with the rest. But that's only after I watch it, after I give it my own score.
I do find myself oftentimes like looking to see, well, what did people like, well, what didn't they like, and I don't make choices on that anymore. I used to, but I don't anymore, but it is still interesting to see, a movie with like 20% on Rotten Tomatoes, and then you see audience scores which are like through the roof,
Right.
and it makes you go, there's something to this, or vice versa, where you
Yeah.
have critics that are like, oh my god, this isn't 100%, and the audiences are like, yeah, 30%, and yeah, like it's a hard to count for that disparity. It's huge. That's massive. So,
I think for a current movie, Bama Rush, I saw that counter thing where the critics gave it. The critics are 100%. It is 100% certified fresh. Look at the audience score; it's at 4%.
oh my god, that's crazy.
I was like, that is wow, wow.
Yeah, that's enormous.
I haven't seen a film so universally loved by critics and universally panned by audiences before. But I haven't seen it, and I know I just said I don't check reviews, but in this particular case, I've been doing research about the wide disparities between audiences and critics, and it just kind of one that came up.
Wow. Just
I
goes to
know.
show, though, you can't always trust. And I don't mean this like in a bad way. I just mean you really can't always trust what a critic score is. And again, there are mitigating factors like the number of ratings. I mean, if the tomato meter, or the IMDb metric is like, you've got like 150 or more reviews from the critic, that's probably a pretty good metric. But if your audience rating score is anything under 1,000 or just 1,000, that's not very good, because it's really hard to get the right consensus unless you're dealing with bigger numbers. So, yeah, I always take those things kind of into consideration, because sometimes they just don't make any sense. Like, there's cult classics that have the worst ratings, and clearly they're cult classics for a reason. I mean, we keep talking about them over and over and over again. So, you know, the conversation about whether a movie is good or not is clearly it extends far beyond what critics like or don't like. I guess that's the best way to say it.
Well, my next movie, of which I just closed the tab on. Why did I do that? My next movie is one that also has a pretty wide disparity between tomato meter and audience score. Although, just to correct myself, apparently Bama Rush is at 11% audience score.
Oh,
So
wow. That's
still
still pretty bad.
100% critics, but 11% audience. My number 5 is, in my opinion, a classic. Some might consider it a cult classic. Sure, why not? But it is, to me, one of those movies that, once you start quoting it, you know what it is. So, life's a garden. Dig it. Sometimes you just got to keep on keeping on. Talking about Joe Dirt. That's Dear Tay. No, it's Joe Dirt. The story of a janitor that manages to get interviewed on a nationally syndicated radio show, telling about his life and how he was abandoned at the Grand Canyon as a child, and how he never knew his parents, and how he met a girl, and for some reason Kid Rock hates him. You know, you're just regular, everyday, run of the mill story of a guy. Why is Joe Dirt so good to me? Honestly, I don't know. I love watching it because I laugh every time I watch it. There, there are, there there are some things on there. Just thinking about thing, just the lines. Like I said, just hearing the dialogue in my head, like "You're my sister." That's exactly what's going on. Uh, Everyone's like, "Oh my god!" And he's like, "I'm just kidding," and that's just hilarious. Um, okay, some might not find it hilarious, but I find it hilarious. And gosh, David Spade gives a tremendous performance as somebody wrote the White Trash Forrest Gump, where it's all about his travels um, in hopes of finding his birth parents, and then how he eventually winds up in this LA radio station, and subsequently interviewed. Is it raunchy? I'm going to say it's not. There there's certainly some blue material. Some of it falls from the sky, but it is it's not overly explicit by any means whatsoever. It hits that fine line of going to the going to the edge and then stepping back. So that way, if you've got a young teenager or a tween that you just want to sit down and watch a movie with, it's not out of the question. It's a PG-13 movie, 90 minutes long. It does everything that it wants to in that 90 minutes. And personally, it made me feel for this character that absolutely had nothing. He had nobody, and all he wants to do is feel like he belongs somewhere. And I think it's a story that a lot of us can relate to. Joe Dirt is, without sounding too high horsey, it's a story about all of us when it comes down to being accepted. Universal themes, if only really laser focused as far as the character goes into Southern rock and mullets. But I think anybody that enjoys this movie sees a little bit of themselves in Joe Dirt, and that's why the audience scores at something like 63%. And again, that's why I think we enjoy it as much as we do, because we just want to know who we are, be accepted for who we are, and eventually get the girl. Joe Dirt is my number 5, and again, it's one of those movies that will be frequently watched uh, several times throughout the rest of my life.
Okay, honestly, I didn't like Joe Dirt, and I thought it was pretty ridiculous. But I
That's a peanut.
do, but I do think that. But first of all, I think it's totally in genre for you, knowing what you like, so I can see it.
Yeah, right up my alley.
And I mean that this, yeah, I do. I personally am just not a huge fan of that particular type of comedy. It
Very true.
Yeah, I'm just not there. But that doesn't mean that, like, I know a lot of people that really love it. So I can see the appeal. I
It
totally can.
falls under that, produced by Adam Sandler.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Yeah, and I'm not a big Adam Sandler fan anyway. So yeah, there's that. Okay, my number 4 movie is a movie that, gee, what can I say? Everybody kind of hated this movie except me, who really loves it. Um, this movie, when I first saw it, I had I had already been watching Supernatural, so I already knew Jared Padalecki, but House of Wax definitely kicked it up a notch. This is House of Wax 2005, and it's funny because I just mentioned Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, and I sort of feel like the heart of this story is kind of like a Whatever Happened to Baby Jane kind of story with the two brothers, and it's actually really interesting. There's a lot of practical effects in this. It's not House of Wax the original, which I have to say was a billion times better than this. The one with Vincent Price, and it's not this. But this movie did something I think for horror that a few other movies kind of dare to do, which is other than create a situation where everything is really creepy and oh, you don't exactly know what's going on. It marries the body horror with a little bit something more psychological. And oftentimes we don't get that. Oftentimes our killers, whoever they are in our horror movies, they tend to be a little bit more mindless, or less mindless. They don't have a lot going on behind the scenes, and their motivations tend to be very simple, like one line can explain what their total motivations are. House of Wax does something a little bit different where it really creates a generational family trauma that is being passed down in layers. Yes, thank you for that metaphor, guys. Like wax on it's a fascinating study of the way that we can both try to preserve the past in very unhealthy ways, but also try to freeze in time the things that we covet and want the most. There's something about House of Wax that explores this very subtle but really cool idea that I then, after this movie came out in subsequent years, started seeing lots and lots of really interesting storytelling around. And I like that. I love it when a movie can spawn other movies into telling stories that have these same kind of heart values to them. So, it I mean, what can I say about this movie? It isn't a good. Um, it's not the greatest example of awesome horror, but what it is it is the how can I even say this? It's the idea behind what I think most slasher movies try to be, but it gives us a little bit something more. It gives us a little bit something extra to be thinking about. And that kind of works. I do like that. I also like the idea that, they kind of account for some things that I feel like we all are always asking in horror movies. Like, well, you know, why didn't you guys just make a call? And how come nobody knows about this place? And there's a lot of I feel like somebody did a lot of thinking into those scenarios and came up with some interesting ideas about how to make that work. I like that. I actually really liked it. I also kind of like this idea that that when the critics talk about this, they talk about, how it's just basically like torture porn, which I don't actually think that it is. I mean, Saw is torture porn. House of Wax is definitely not in that garden variety kind of movie genre. But I like the fact that, and by I'm being kind of snarky here, but I like the fact that when critics talk about this, they talk about, kind of like this idea that somehow they can't see what would be appealing here. And I feel like that's not, like, this isn't a movie that you're looking for some kind of A grade entertainment out of. This is definitely a movie where you're looking for the thematic ideas behind the horror, like what makes this scary. And there are plenty of very scary moments in this movie. There's also a lot of really good world building, and I think I alluded to that before when I talked about the cell phones and the, hey, what about this town? There's great world building in this, and that's also something that you don't see very often in a horror movie. So I'm going to go ahead and leave my number four choice as House of Wax from 2005. And if you love Jared Padalecki, you'll love this movie. He's such a little baby in this movie. It's kind of cool. Did we lose you, Josh? Okay. Well, I think Josh is still on mute. So, should I go ahead and tell you what my number three is? Should I jump ahead in the line? Well, I don't. Okay. I'm thinking yes. Okay. So I'm gonna say that for my number three choice, this movie I'm going off of something kind of old, because as the movie got more and more notoriety, more and more people began to jump on the bandwagon and actually liked it. But originally, when this movie came out, audiences hate I'm sorry, not audiences, critics hated it. They hated it so much. They couldn't understand it. They felt like it was just a long meandering labyrinth of shots in different order. They didn't quite get what was up with the kids. They had all kinds of problems with it. Okay, so the movie is called Skinamarink. Now the movie has a really high rating on both Rotten Tomatoes, and it's even come up in Metacritic. Metacritic, it was really low before. It was like only at 30%. And it was it was really scathing. The critic reviews were scathing. But Skinamarink has this, what I would call, experimental horror aspect to it, which is we're we are experiencing everything through the lens of an unknown entity. We can't begin to figure out what this entity is. We're not supposed to, but it warps reality. And it warps reality in a way that makes the kids that are in this movie, basically, it turns them into pawns. And as it's turning them into its own pawns, it's creating these terrible, horrible situations for them, which are subtle at best. And I do mean really subtle. Like, you have to pay attention to what's happening on the screen, because the dialogue is going to be really, really sparse. It's very thin. But the filmmaking here, the audio editing, is absolutely astounding. Um, it works on every single level that you could imagine. Now, there's a lot of theories about Skinamarink. One of them is that the boy that we experience a lot of this movie through is basically a he's like, he falls down the stairs and he's in some kind of coma, and so we're seeing the world through his coma, and that kind of makes sense. But then there are other aspects of this that are absolutely oh, I'm trying to think of a good way to say this, but they're absolutely charged with this idea that there is something very supernatural that is creating this upside down reality for these kids. His sister disappears halfway through the movie. This little boy, is experiencing missing doorways, missing time, things that don't make any sense at all. And we're along for this absolutely ambient, gorgeous horror journey. So I pick Skinamarink as my number three. And despite the fact that people now seem to be coming around to it, and I see a lot of new reviews on this. So I think as people began to understand that this was experimental horror and what they were actually looking at, they began to kind of come around on it, which is great, and I'm really glad for that. But when this movie first came out, the scores were absolutely horrible, and I do mean horrible. So Skinamarink, and this is from this year. I think it's actually based on another short story that was like a quick web story, which was done, and then they turned it into a full length movie. And again, I saw this on Shutter, and I was absolutely blown away by it. So Skinamarink gets my number 3 spot. And welcome back, Josh.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Gonna say though, as I was updating all the lists, had a power fluctuation,
Oh
uh,
no.
and lost all of my progress. So,
Oh no. Okay. Well,
can
good thing
you
I still have
recap?
mine.
Let's see. I have Conan the Destroyer, Blade Trinity, Resident Evil, The Gate.
Dark was the night.
Dark. 14.
And then House of Wax.
House of Wax.
And then Skinamarink.
Alrighty. There, updated. I have to remember to save frequently just in case, you know, my house tries to censor me again. So those critics.
You know, I was just gonna say it's probably the critics that are trying to shut it down, saying, you know, we're right and you're wrong.
How dare they possibly?
It's true. So this brings up, while you're doing that, this brings up a really good point, which is, you know, just because an initial score is low does not mean that it will always be low. There are plenty of times when more critics come on board and begin to review something, especially when you get like a debut on Netflix, or you get like, you know, a movie coming off of VOD onto one of the streaming services. Sometimes you'll get more critics and more audience scores attached to them, and I got to say that sometimes those scores, sometimes they go down, but a lot of times they end up going up. So that's kind of a good thing. So be thinking of that. That's exactly what happened with Skinamarink.
Okay, seems like it's slowly but surely finding its audience.
I think so, and that actually makes me really happy. So it's on my list, but it's on my list with that caveat. So now you have four. You have four. You have two movies to do: number 4 and number 3.
Okay, number 4, number 3. I'll keep it quick. My number 4. Although now I have to make sure I have all my notes brought up again. Stupid critics shutting us out from telling the truth, getting the truth out there. That they're wrong sometimes. All right.
Well, they're not just wrong; they're wrong according to us, which I think is a really good way to think about it, because we're the ones that are making these choices, not them.
Yeah, we're the ones that throw down our money. They get to see all the stuff for free.
Exactly.
I'm not sure whose argument that helps more. But
Well, I think it's for clarity's sake, because for clarity's sake, when we make choices, we're making choices based on, you know, all the aggregate of all the other lists that we've made. And I feel like that's an important distinction. We are in charge of what we like and dislike, not critics. But it's important to understand that I think, you know, I'm not downplaying the role of a critic, because I do think that they serve a function. It's just they can't always be right for everybody. Sometimes they veer off track, and that's why we have this list.
exactly. So you want to know what my next one is?
I do. I'm super excited. Tell me.
So I'm gonna, like I said, I'm gonna make it quick because, after all, you can only live life a quarter mile at a time.
And apparently from one power brownout to the next. So
My number something or other is The Fast and the Furious.
Ooh.
The
Yeah,
first
that's a
movie.
fan favorite.
It's the first movie. If you like Point Break, then you love The Fast and the Furious. Why? Because it's the same movie with cars.
That's such a good point.
It's, I mean, it introduces us to uh, Dominic Toretto and Brian O'Connor. And what you didn't realize at the time in 2001 is that they would still be releasing new movies 22 years later. That's right. The Fast and the Furious all began with this one movie, as origins generally do begin somewhere. And it is the classic tale of, you know, boy becomes cop, cop goes undercover, cop meets girl, cop falls for girl, girl's brother is cop's number one suspect in a string of truck robberies. Cop has to race brother in a winner takes all style drag race. Cop learns that it's all about family. That's the Fast and the Furious in a nutshell. It has, at the time, it introduced us to, okay, maybe some people knew about like car culture and these underground racing scenes before this, but there were a lot of dumb people that got tuned in um, when this movie came out. A lot of stories about street racing became prolific. Um, not mind you in like modded street racers, but no, uh, dummies leaving the theater going, "Let's race." Yeah, remember those stories. But this isn't a list about how movies affect the slowest of us, so to speak. It is what the critics got wrong. They give it a 55%. It has a 55% rotten rating on Rotten Tomatoes. And it's like, how? It, again, it's one of those movies where you should know what you're getting into when you show up. It's going to have fast cars, cheesy dialogue. The acting's not going to be, you know, Oscar worthy by any stretch of the imagination. And you're going to learn, you know, it's all about family. And that was before it became, you know, the meme that's been played out for 20 years, over 20 years. This is the originator. This is the thing that made all of us go, yes, we want to see at least 10 more of these. Now, whether or not it overstayed its welcome, that's not for me to decide on this episode. And I will decide it at some point. But as it stands, Fast and the Furious definitely does not deserve to be sitting at a rotten level because it absolutely nails what it was aiming for. And I think when you think about these movies and critics are looking for quality instead of intention, they're just missing the point. And they're missing it by a mile. So the Fast and the Furious is my number 4.
So, are you at your number 3 now?
I believe so. See, I got to make sure I remember to add it to my list.
Because I'm at number 2, so you should have said what your number 3 is.
Okay, so my number 3, the movie that comes next on my list, is a movie that honestly I didn't watch it until recently. And when I when I watched it, it absolutely blew my mind. And it wasn't until doing research for this to where I saw um, that it has a 41% on Rotten Tomatoes, and it it made my head hurt because I didn't understand how a movie where Patrick Swayze rips a guy's freaking throat out
Oh,
can sit at a 41%. I'm talking about Roadhouse. Roadhouse is considered a rotten movie.
so campy.
It's
It is
so
campy.
amazing. Patrick Swayze doing his Patrick Swayziest. Sam Elliott as the grizzled veteran bouncer. Yeah, let's beat up these guys. What is not to love? Patrick Swayze rips a guy's throat out, like out of his neck, almost Bruce Lee style. He's like, ah, yeah, and then like, this is just an insanely intense film that I was not expecting when I watched it for the first time within the last few months. I watched this movie and I said, wow, I think this is one of my new favorite movies. It's got to be a top tenner for sure. Uh, Holy crap. It is, it's got, it's got everything. It's got fights. It's got love. It's got, uh, I wouldn't say witty banter, but comical banter. It does such a good job of being what it is that it's just saying the name on Family Guy and it elicits a reaction. You know, Peter's like, Roadhouse. And you know exactly what that means. Roadhouse is an iconic film. And I'm sorry, but the critics, 41%, they absolutely got it wrong. This is such an epic movie. I love every second, and that is my number three.
Yeah. I mean, I have seen Roadhouse many times as a it's silly, but it's good. It reminds me Roadhouse reminds me of Walker, the movie Walker, where he's like the Texas Ranger and he's got a set order to the town. That's what Roadhouse reminds me of. Like it's got that, big man energy, so much machismo, so much, sort of like everybody behaving in their trope roles. And it's actually quite good. Also the music in Roadhouse is really good too. You can't help but love the music in Roadhouse. So yeah, good choice. Good choice. All right. My number two is a movie that I cannot understand why people don't absolutely love. I mean, who doesn't love dragons? Don't tell me if you don't love dragons. I don't want to know. I love dragons so much. Um, and I will admit that when I first saw this movie, I was a little bit like, what did you just do here? But I absolutely feel like it has not just grown on me over the years. I feel like I wasn't watching it for the right reasons when I watched it before. So, 2002, there was a movie called Reign of Fire. It has Matthew McConaughey, it has Christian Bale, it has really cool dragons. Everybody in this movie, it seems like they are downtrodden and sad. And yeah, well, it's the dragon apocalypse. Dragons are killing everyone, and they're trying to figure out what to do. I think the reason that I love this movie so much is because there is an amazing amount of thought given to how people would exist in a world controlled by dragons. The way that they try to kill them, the way they have like, early warning systems. What is it that would create leaders out of this? And I mean, I'm not just saying that like, oh, it's not, let's face it, a movie that is about the dragon apocalypse is not necessarily going to be the most highly intellectual movie that there is, but it is still great. There is so much to love in this movie. Not to mention the fact that the dragons themselves. I mean, look, I give it up for Game of Thrones because, yeah, you guys got dragons. I love that. House of Dragon, yep, you got my heart for those dragons. But they're not the kind of dragons in Reign of Fire. Reign of Fire, they are absolutely badass. They're so cool. Um, there's a lot of practical effects in Reign of Fire. There's also some pretty sappy storylines, so you got to kind of get past that. But I love this movie. I love it a lot. Um, and also, I really love Matthew McConaughey and Christian Bale's dynamic. There's something so fun about watching the two of them together. I really, really, really liked it. I think my favorite critic here sums it up perfectly. His name was Anthony Quinn. He sums it up perfectly. He says, "For all its silliness, Reign of Fire never bores and may actually appear to your inner 12-year-old." And honestly, that's exactly what I feel like is going on right here. This is a really fun movie, and it really gave me a pause in terms of entertainment for entertainment's sake and dragons. So I am going to say uh number two, Reign of Fire. Dude, this movie is just like so over the top that it's hard not to like it. There's just something so crazy about it that it just sucks you in. So there you go. Number two, Reign of Fire.
And one of these days, I will watch it.
Oh man, I really hope you do watch that because that's really good. Really
Well,
good. I think you'd like it.
maybe. I'm not opposed to dragons. But my number two has no dragons in it.
Aw, I'm sorry to
I
hear that.
know it's a bummer. Maybe
But
my number one will.
most movies with dragons actually get pretty good ratings, so that kind of makes sense.
And spoiler, my number one will not have dragons either.
I kind of figured.
My number
kind
two is a movie that I've talked about frequently on this show. So I'm just going to tell you immediately. Um, it's Basketball.
of. Oh,
Yeah, just
okay.
ripped off the Band-Aid. Basketball. 41% approval rating. So, of course, it's rotten. And first of all, it's directed and written by David Zucker. So, how dare you?
Mhm.
Uh, if there was ever somebody that had an idea of what comedy is, it's usually him. Usually, but I will say this: uh, Basketball is, well, first of all, it stars Matt Stone and Trey Parker, the creators of South Park, and quite frankly, anything that they're in has always um, I found enjoyable, whether it's Basketball, um, what is it, Cannibal the musical, um, Orgasmo. You can stop me at any time. No, basketball.
Why? It's kind of
Basketball
fun. It's kind of fun.
is it's just an enjoyable movie that absolutely tickles my sophomore side. It makes teenage me giggle up and down, and I quote it repeatedly for those very reasons. Um, one of I saw it 8 times in the theater. It features my my second favorite band of all time, Real Big Fish, as the Minnesota Bears house band. Um, I love this movie. absolutely love this movie. I will watch it any day of the week as long as the kids aren't around.
Uh,
Let's get that straight. Um, just watch it. If you haven't watched, watch it. Form your own opinion. Then it was geared towards, you know, how do I put this? There was a period in the '90s where the R-rated movies that you weren't supposed to watch as a young teenager, it became sort of a mission to get your hands on it and watch it, you know, because it was sort of a forbidden thing. Basic Ball is one of those. American Pie, things like that. It's in the tradition of the sort of raunchy R-rated comedies of the '80s, um, but less. Even though American Pie is all about sex, it's less sex driven. As far as, oh look, it's constant gratuitous nudity, and it's more about the content, the the things that people say to each other. And one of the things that Basic Ball, I think, helped refine in me was that sort of banter, that talk that you have, uh, that way of talking you have with your best friends, and basketball perfectly encapsulates, just two guys that are lifelong friends that can talk to each other in this really informal shorthand. I mean, after all, there's like a 2-minute scene where they're just saying dude to each other, but they're having a full conversation where it's dude, 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 dude,
Good
dude.
lord. You
And it just it hits so well. If you look at it on paper, sure, it probably doesn't fly off the page at you. It doesn't really hit you in the way that it does when these two guys actually perform it. But it's when those performances come into play, when you see uh, Jenny McCarthy show up with a trailer hitch, and she's like, "I got this grandma for you," you know, and you go, "Oh, that joke! I see what you're going for there." When you see uh, just all of this insane stuff going on, tie that also to the fact that the '90s were a very, I don't know the word is, I'm going to say ambiguous time for sports, where baseball was trying interleague play and teams were moving all the time, and this is kind of not a retort, but a response, if you will, by creating the sport that has none of those crazy things going on. But there's one rich guy that's like, I'm going to introduce these crazy things so we can make more money, and that's just how I've said too much already. Basketball, I think, it is a well deserved cult classic title, but it would do my heart good if it just had just that actual respect from people that would understand uh, what it's trying to be, which is exactly what it is. It's all surface stuff, uh, and I just wish the critics would appreciate that more. Basic Ball is my number two.
I this one is definitely just that's yours, Josh.
Yeah,
You're gonna have
yeah,
to
it's
own that
totally
one.
me.
Uh, that's definitely not my cuppa, if you will. Just I although it fits the genre that I think again that you kind of like, so I can see why this movie is why it's good for you. I can totally see that. I think I can also kind of see why critics didn't like it though. for different reasons than I think some of the other movies on the list might make sense. I mean, this particular movie is kind of like it's it's precise in its period of time. So if you watched this 10 years after the movie was made and you weren't sort of in the culture at that moment, I can understand why it wouldn't make any sense or why it would feel like dated or, oh, that's my dad's kind of movie or something like that because it has such specific cultural references in it. And I have to say that this is also, I think, a problem, not a problem, but it's also one of the reasons that a lot of the movies that I absolutely adore, like my number one, which is coming up, um, from the 1980s, also suffer from that same thing. It's the story itself can be good, but it's so culturally or periodically dated that it's hard for people to see, well, why was that a good movie? So, doesn't make the movie any less good to the people who like it, but I can sort of at least understand why people don't watch those movies with more gusto and enthusiasm. My number one movie is a movie that on Rotten Tomatoes, unfortunately, never has really gotten above 40 some odd percent, like 43%, I think. Um, but audiences love this movie. Audiences give it a 73%. So I would say that that's pretty big. The reason, well, before I get to the reason, I'll tell you what it is. Ridley Scott in 1985 did a movie called Legend. And now, specifically, I suggest that you watch Legend, the European version, not the American version. And it's hard to find. I had to go hunt for it on a DVD collector's site, but I did find it, and it's got actually all of the versions of Legend on it: the director's cut, the UK cut, the American cut. The way that you'll know if it's the UK cut or the American cut is the American cut has songs and a soundtrack from a band called Tangerine Dream, which was really iconic at the time. Um, and the UK version does not have any of those songs or accompanying soundtrack in the background. It's got totally different soundtrack. The other thing that's different is in the UK cut, the whole movie basically changes because motivations change. And while a lot of the action is the same, it's done for different reasons. And so the idea of darkness sort of changes aspect. The love between Lily and Jack changes in its dynamic, and the ending changes completely. So I just highly recommend that you watch the UK version. But Legend is one of those like retold fairy tales. They were very popular in the 1980s, and 90s too. Every single fairy tale that was ever told got its moment in the sun. And Ridley Scott kind of put together this idea of, um, you know, making a fairy tale movie, but also I think adding some interesting, very dark elements to it. And that's where you get Tim Curry, who is darkness. It's I think, one of the most sort of centralized evil characters without being a caricature of evil, that I can remember seeing, that felt like somebody gave it a lot of thought, not just like slapped a label on it and said, okay, well, you're evil darkness. It really felt like there was something attached to it. You could totally spawn off a whole movie or several that are all about darkness and his relationship with the light, his father, things that just, they're amazing. Um, Critics didn't like this movie, I think, because of what we have said throughout our list, which is they were looking for something in the story which is different from what audiences were looking for. Audiences definitely see the here's Tom Cruise. Uh, there is something whimsical here. There's unicorns. There's a kind of fairy lightness about this movie, which feels like a good old quest. You know, again, harking back to my number 10 pick with Conan the Destroyer. Um, it feels very everybody get ready for the merch tie-in. There's a whimsicality about this. It's extremely whimsical. I really I love this movie on so many different levels, but I feel like critics didn't see what audiences can see into it, which is sometimes a simple story, a simple love story that has, you know, some outside interesting ideas and unicorns and fairy tale and can really work. In a similar way to what Labyrinth did, I think Legend does as well, but it's a little bit more convoluted. Also, if you listen to the director's expose about how Legend was made, um, Ridley Scott's narrative about this movie is absolutely astounding. It's amazing that this movie was ever made in the first place. The actors went through intense periods of all kinds of things, from, you know, depression to they were alone a lot. They were doing shots on their own. The set burned down completely. The whole set burned down. Um, it's just a fascinating story behind the scenes. That does not make me love the movie anymore for the story value, but it's still a really interesting backstory. So my number one movie, for critics hated it, audiences or I loved it, is Legend from 1985.
Okay. That completes your list, correct?
It does. It does. It does.
Then I guess it's time for me to complete mine.
It is. What is your number one?
My number one is a movie that has changed the life of everyone that has I've ever shown it to,
Oh,
because it's one of those movies that didn't get, super widespread release and really built its reputation purely on word of mouth. It is the definition of cult classic, if you will. And when I again was researching this episode, I saw that. Let me pull up the current tomato meter. It sits at 27%. One critic wrote, train wreck. But here's the thing, the audience meter, my people, have it sitting at a 91%.
ooh.
So it's quite the wide disparity. One critic said, what did he put? Where did he put? Where did it? So no. Looking. Oh, I would click the wrong thing. No wonder I couldn't find it. One critic said that. Okay, I lost it again. It wasn't good what this critic said. Oh wait, there it is. The Boondock Saints has ended up being a cheap-looking B movie that's pretentious, derivative, and sorely lacking sense of fun. The Boondock Saints is my number one movie, and this guy says it's sorely lacking a sense of fun. The movie's filled with one-liners like crazy. It's got the humor. It's got the fun. It's two brothers, as I've used this term before, taking the piss out of each other at every turn. Why'd you buy the rope? What are we going to need a rope for? And then, sure enough, they need the rope. And so, the brothers mock each other for that. It's it's such a fun, violent movie about two brothers on uh, uh, uh and I this means we're not going to be doing any kind of episode of characters on a mission from God. But these, like the Blues Brothers, these brothers are on a mission from God to clean up the streets and to kill all the bad guys. And no, it's Sean Patrick Flannery and Norman Reedus. You know Norman Reedus. If you're into The Walking Dead, you know Norman Reedus. Sean Patrick Flannery as well. He's also been in a few things. You might also know this other guy named Willem Dafoe,
Oh yeah, that guy.
an amazing actor, and uh, quite frankly, uh, an absolute joy to watch in this movie because of the way he brings Smecker, the special agent Smecker, to life, and gives him the dimensions of not only being a guy that is so good at his job that he's able to in his head recreate these crime scenes um, to a frighteningly degree of accuracy. But yeah, he's also a gay character, which gets brought up almost subconsciously by some of his colleagues in the local PD, and also involves one of I think the more funny scenes where he's in bed and he gets a phone call, but it's something that you'd have to see to fully appreciate. But if that wasn't enough for you, you remember a guy named Billy Connolly? That guy is so awesome. I'm sure there's a few head of the class fans out there, right?
Probably.
But the point is, everybody that I've shown this to has, one, thanked me for showing it to them, and two, said, this is just a great movie. So when I did the research for this, and I, was checking out lists of wide disparities, and it's like, what? I thought everybody loved the Boondock Saints. I thought it was just universally praised, and no, audiences love it. Audiences think it's just amazing. Critics, not so much. For some reason, they find it lacks joy. It nothing makes sense. That it's just sophomoric and unfunny. To which I say, sophomoric, sure, I'll give it to that. I'll give you that. But the interaction, Rocco makes such a much needed presence in this movie. So it's not just the two brothers, taking jabs at each other, but to have this guy that is kind of tagging along. He works for the mob, and he's kind of disenfranchised by them. So he's sort of the contact that gets them the information they need to take out all the big mobster guys. He wants to be a good fella. He wants to be made. But when he finds out, it's not really going to work out for him in that arena, he helps the brothers, his friends, his buddies, and they make this just hilariously unlikely trio of vigilantes. And I know I'm making it sound like a comedy, but no, it's also dark, it's bloody, and it leaves you asking the question, you know, is it okay for someone to take the law into their own hands? That's the sort of the moral question. And for those the critics that wrote, that it's not a question that needs to be asked, or there's some sort of something morally reprehensible about this even being a question. Uh, I don't ever recall seeing someone watch a Batman movie and question whether or not Batman's mission is justified. No, you buy into the conceit and you go along for the ride. Now, mind you, Batman also has the rule don't kill, so that's sort of where the conversation gets more interesting, and it's very much addressed in the movie. As it's one of the main plot lines. As Smecker is kind of divided, he's like, I mean, he has to bust them, right? They're criminals, but at the same time, they're only going after criminals. That's the only reason they're criminals, because they're killing bad guys. So he's sort of in this, in his mind, a moral gray area. And I'm not going to break down the entire plot of Boondock Saints. I said way too much about it as it is, but the fact of the matter is, in my opinion, the Boondock Saints is a quintessential classic film of its type, and I have no idea how the critics got it so wrong. But I also believe that it would have worked better as a one and done. But hey, what can you do? Boondock Saints is my number one.
Whoops, I was on mute. Well, that was a really super interesting list, and I think I can safely say that even though some of the things that we have chosen you probably won't like, you might like some of them if you give them a chance. So don't be listening to every critic out there who says don't watch that movie. Give it a try. You might like it, like we did. So I'm going to go through my list, and then Josh is going to go through his list, and we will get some homework for next week. My number 10 was Conan the Destroyer. My number 9 was Blade Trinity. My number 8 was Resident Evil, the first one. My number 7 was Silent Hill. Number 6, The Gate. Number 5, Dark Was the Night. Number 4, House of Wax. Number 3, Skinamarink from 2023. And number 2, Reign of Fire. Number 1, Legend from Ridley Scott. How about you, Josh?
Well, my number 10 was Jury Duty. My number 9 was The Pest. Number 8, the Super Mario Brothers movie. Excuse me. Number 7, Don't Look Up. Number 6, The Flintstones. Number 5, Joe Dirt. Number 4, The Fast and the Furious. Number 3, Roadhouse. Number 2, Basketball. And number 1, The Boondock Saints. You're probably wondering what your homework is for next week.
I am, actually.
And I think you're going to really dig it. I don't know why I emphasize dig, because it has nothing to do with digging.
Yeah, I'm starting to think, is this a Joe Dirt reference? Oh boy, okay.
No. Believe it or not, we've already announced this list. We announced it in like the first couple of episodes that this show existed.
I see. Yes.
Because next week is the anniversary of D-Day.
Oh, yes. Yes, it is.
And we said a long time ago, for the anniversary of D-Day, we should do something related to World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And that is almost sort of a subgenre in and of itself, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
There are World War II comedies. There are World War II, just classic war movies, uh, like hardcore war movies, just all sorts of different ways to tell stories in that era. So the question became, how do we narrow it down to, instead of just doing World War II movies, because otherwise it'll just be like, this is our World War II movies part one list, because eventually we're going to have to talk about these other World War II movies because there are just so many. So the question was how to do it. And I've decided that next week's list is in fact about World War II movies, but there has to be a heavy Navy element. We're talking about World War II Navy element.
Okay.
I know that might be a little too laser focused for some of you out there, but honestly, there, like I said, there's so many different types of World War II movies. I had to figure out some way to narrow it down so we're not just all over the place. I'm not trying to cast a wide net here, um, and exclude so many other things when it comes to the era that's it's being portrayed. But I think the Navy has had amazing representation in cinema, especially when it comes to World War II. So it can be a comedy, it can be a drama, it can be an action movie, it can be whatever you want it to be. Just make sure that it's set in World War II and there is a naval element. Even if the Navy, it's like, I'm a Navy officer, but I spend all my time on land. That's cool. I'm okay with that. That's fine. Um, but just Navy centric.
Okay. I mean, there's a ton of movies from 1940 and forward that begin to delve into this. I think we've stopped making a lot of them, but there's a ton. Um, hmm. Yeah, there's some interesting. Okay, yeah, I think I've got some ideas. There's some
Can I
pretty
can I can I
interesting
make one
ones.
little confession
Yeah,
about why I decided this?
sure.
I know that a certain someone here has an affinity for big boats.
Pirate ships. Yes, yeah, yeah, that's me.
So I wanted to make sure that this certain someone, who I'm not going to name, it's Jen, is able to, uh, you know, think about boats. It's Jen.
I mean, there's definitely some really cool ones
Mm-hmm.
that tell really interesting stories. And then there's some that are just sort of like, yeah, you'll know what they are the moment that I say, hey, this is my movie. So cool. Yeah, I feel like this could be good. This could be really good.
And I think it'd be a nice way to commiserate the events of June 6th, the anniversary of D-Day.
Yeah, good idea. Okay. All right. Well, hey, listen.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't done anything for in fact, I really haven't done very much World War II at all for moviesandmeals.com. But if you pop over, I do have some updated Memorial Day stuff. We made some flag food, which was kind of cool. It was weird, but it was fun. We had a good time with it. We also maybe I will do something for next week. I'll think about this. A while back we did an entire Black Sails themed dinner. And maybe it might be cool to do something a little bit more in line with World War II there was some really interesting food in vogue in World War II. So maybe we could do something like that. That might be interesting. So if you're interested in something like that, hey, head on over to moviesandmeals.com and give us a quick run through. Tell me what you'd like. Tell me if you see something that you'd like to get an explanation on. Contact me. Let me know. I get lots of cool emails from moviesandmeals.com. Some of it is really interesting. People have the coolest ideas for dishes. So I do pay attention to that stuff. And hopefully this week you'll be able to hear me on my blog, my new podcast, video blog, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. Storyteller Power Hour. I don't know why I cannot I swear I'm tripping over my tongue. I feel like I ended up having tea instead of coffee this afternoon, and I'm feeling it. Good lord. The Storyteller Power Hour. And are we going to have a guest this week, Josh, or are we going to not?
We have not rescheduled the guest that we were booked to have.
Okay. Well, if we're not, then what we are going to talk about are some of our most favorite and influential young adult fiction. There is a section in children's fiction which I think we will save for another time, but young adult fiction has become contentious. And I want to have a nice conversation about why young adult fiction is so important and why we need to preserve access to children in that young adult sphere. So we'll be talking about some of those things. So join us. Join us tomorrow at the same time.
Excellent.
And how about you, Josh? How can we find you all over the web? I know we can't find you at Movies and Meals, but where can we find you?
Well, first of all, I might have to have some sort of contribution. I'm thinking for next week, I'll come up with a recipe revolving around navy beans. How does that sound?
Hey, that would be super fun. That would be very fun. I actually have a family member who they're gone now, but when I was younger, they used to tell me about being in the war and specifically went on and on and on and on about how bad the food was. So we'll try to update it and make it a little bit better. Try to do him proud.
Okay. But if you're looking for me, you can go to widecomedia.com where you can find all of the links to the socials. Hit the old like button, go to the YouTube page, subscribe. And if you're listening to this on a downloaded podcast, don't forget to hit subscribe and, refresh your feed every, I'm just going to say Monday. I upload the episodes on Sunday. So Monday, you're guaranteed to have all the Wadco Media shows ready to go for download. So there's that. If you want to throw a couple of ducats our way, yeah, there's a Patreon, but honestly, it's just a bunch of stuff that it's going to make me do, and I'd rather if you really felt gung ho about it, go to the merchandise store where you can get really cool design merch. I sport my 1021 T-shirt quite frequently, and people ask, what does that mean? And I'm like, well, I'm glad you asked, because 1021 is the internet's favorite movie-centric list-making podcast, as long as you don't check. And it
filled
is
with whimsicality, by the way.
filled with whimsicality. And then if you also want to be filled with whimsicality and show everybody that you're filled with whimsicality, then by all means, that is one of the shirts available at our merchandise shop. Don't forget.
Still makes me laugh.
Friday nights at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific, there is the Wadcast, the Writers, Actors, Directors podcast. And I'm going to be honest with you, I'm not going to be on the show this week. And Brandon's not going to be on the show this week. And see, Brandon has decided to cross the country. He left Los Angeles and has journeyed to the East Coast, to my neck of the woods. So this weekend, there will be a meeting of the minds as Brandon and I come together face to face for the first time in many years. because of our, East Coast West Coast rivalry. So I don't think I'm out of line when I say uh, you're gonna love the sort of uh, fill-in host for the Wattcast this Friday. Jen, do you know who this person is?
I think I vaguely might know who they are. I mean, I do kind of live with them, so might be good.
I think it will. So if you haven't picked up on that subtle message, make sure you tune into the Wadcast on Friday to see who the mystery Jen guest host of the Wadcast is going to be.
It's going to be exciting. It's going to be exciting.
Well, with all of that being said, I guess there's really only one thing left to do, isn't there?
I can't imagine what that one thing is, but please tell me.
Say goodnight, Jen.
Good night, Jen.